Have you ever wondered where an avoidant ex's real sense of power comes from? Most people assume it's just their coldness, their distance, or the way they withdraw. But in truth, all of that is just the armor protecting their ego. That ego thrives on control, on the illusion of superiority, on making you believe they don't need anyone. Distance becomes their shield, and ambiguity becomes their weapon. As Aristotle once said, the downfall of power begins the moment others stop recognizing it. That is exactly where the avoidant ego begins to crack. When you're in their orbit, they quietly assume you'll always be the one holding the relationship together. They feed off your attention, your reassurance, your willingness to excuse their absence. To them, your effort validates their importance. But the moment you redirect that energy back to yourself, when you stop playing the role they wrote for you, their confidence wavers. That's when the walls they built around their ego start to tremble. This isn't about revenge, it's about reality. Socrates once said, "The greatest freedom begins when a person is no longer dependent on the approval of others." The avoidance ego breaks the moment you stop needing their validation and start finding peace within yourself. They may look composed on the surface, but inside, the realization that you are calmer, stronger, and even happier without them unsettles them more than any argument ever could. In this video, we'll explore 6 powerful aspects that dismantle an avoidant ex's ego, not through noise, not through conflict, but through independence, clarity, and reclaiming your own strength. Because the truth is, their ego was never as unshakable as it appeared, and once you stop feeding it, it collapses under its own weight. Digital and emotional disengagement. In today's world, relationships don't end with physical distance. They linger in the digital space through profiles, posts, stories, and quiet signals that keep the connection alive. Avoidant exes understand this well. They thrive on the subtle power of knowing you're still watching, still reacting, still decoding their crumbs online. Every like, every late-night scroll through their feed feeds their ego. But the moment you disengage silently and completely, that quiet withdrawal becomes one of the most powerful strikes against their control. This disengagement isn't about revenge, it isn't about drama, it's simply a clear decision. My attention is no longer your fuel. When you unfollow, stop checking their stories, or stop giving digital reactions, you are not just changing a setting, you are making an emotional statement. Their ego loses the nourishment it secretly depended on. What unsettles them most is the invisibility of this act. Unlike blocking, which signals anger, disengagement leaves no trace. You disappear from their virtual world without a sound. And when they notice the silence, not from what you said, but from what you no longer give, they feel the control slip from their hands. Avoidants build their confidence on the assumption that no matter how distant they become, you'll always remain tethered. They expect your eyes to linger, your thoughts to orbit them. But when you withdraw your digital gaze, their ego is confronted with an uncomfortable truth. They no longer occupy the space they believed was theirs. The lesser-known philosopher Helenorus Kine once wrote, "Attention is the quietest currency of power. Wherever you spend it, you declare who truly owns you." That observation captures the essence of disengagement. Your attention was the currency that sustained their superiority. By reclaiming it, you remind both yourself and them that the account is closed. Practically, this transformation shows up in small but profound ways. You stop analyzing who liked their posts. You no longer rehearse imaginary conversations prompted by their vague updates. You don't give them the satisfaction of seeing your name in their story views. Slowly, your time and focus return to you, and with it, a freedom they can no longer interrupt. For the avoidant ex, this is a silent earthquake. On the outside, they may carry on, but inside they can't shake the awareness that your attention is gone. They can't test your emotional availability anymore because you've taken back the stage where they once performed. Digital and emotional disengagement is not only a wound to their ego, it's a rebirth for you. It signals that you no longer allow them unrestricted access to your mind, your heart, or your peace. And that realization, quiet, invisible, irreversible, shakes the avoidant more than any argument ever could. The power of indifference. There is nothing that unsettles an avoidant ex more than your indifference. For as long as you are reacting, whether with love, anger, or even desperation, they remain in control. Reaction is their fuel. It tells them they still occupy space in your mind, that their absence still creates noise in your world. But the moment you step into indifference, you take that fuel away. Suddenly, their greatest weapon, the ability to provoke an emotional response, loses its sharpness. Indifference is not hatred. Hatred still ties you to the person, still keeps you locked in a cycle of proving and resisting. Indifference, on the other hand, is freedom. It is the quiet knowing that their presence or absence no longer defines your state of being, and that is the deepest bruise to their ego, because they have built their sense of worth on the assumption that you will always react. Think of it like a stage play. For years you were cast in the role of responder. They pulled back, you leaned forward. They created distance, you tried to close it. They tested, and you reassured. This dynamic gave them the illusion of superiority. But when you walk off that stage, when you refuse to play the part, the spotlight suddenly exposes their emptiness. Without your reactions, their script collapses. One little-known philosopher, Epictetus Jr., once remarked, "The true power of a person lies in what he chooses to ignore." That single line captures the essence of indifference. By ignoring what once had the power to shake you, you shift the balance. It's not about pretending they don't exist, it's about genuinely reaching a place where their actions no longer dictate your emotions. In real life, this looks simple but feels radical. You stop checking your phone for their messages. You stop decoding their vague signals. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head that will never happen. Instead, you redirect that energy toward building your own center. Slowly, you discover that your calm is no longer at their mercy. For the avoidant, this is disorienting. They expected resistance. They expected you to knock on the door they half closed. They expected you to spiral, to chase, to plead. But when you don't, when your energy simply detaches, their ego trembles. Not because you shouted, not because you punished them, but because you stopped needing them to notice you at all. Indifference is the invisible blow. It doesn't announce itself with drama, it doesn't seek validation, it is quiet, steady, and final. And in that silence lies the undoing of the avoidant ego. Because the hardest truth for them to swallow is this: they are no longer the center of your story. You are. Refusing emotional rescue avoidants have a pattern. They often return when life isn't going well, when everything around them begins to collapse. Career setbacks, conflicts with friends, or personal loneliness, they suddenly remember the one person who always offered comfort. You. They know you were the steady hand, the emotional sponge, the one who absorbed their storms without demanding much in return. But here lies the turning point. What happens when you stop rescuing them? This is when their ego's fragile foundation begins to show. They built their sense of superiority on the assumption that you would always be there to soothe their wounds. In their mind, it wasn't dependence, it was entitlement. Yet the moment you withdraw, the mask slips. They realize their control was never about strength. It was about leaning on your compassion while giving so little back. Avoidants like to project independence, but crises reveal the opposite. When life shatters, they seek the safety of familiarity. You were their unspoken safety net, the one who would listen at 2 a.m., who would forgive their silence, and still show up when they needed it most. But when you choose not to answer that call, when you refuse to become their emotional salve again, their ego feels the weight of abandonment, not because you rejected them, but because you've unhooked them from a cycle of reliance. The philosopher Demetrius Phelan once wrote, "Dependence is most exposed where freedom was most loudly declared." That single insight captures the avoidant paradox. They declare themselves free, unattached, untouched by need, until your silence during their crisis reveals how deeply they relied on you all along. Practically, this refusal isn't easy. Your heart may still want to comfort them. Empathy tempts you to step back into the old role, but resisting this pull is the very act that reshapes the dynamic. By refusing to play rescuer, you reclaim your energy for yourself. You remind both them and yourself that your life is not built to carry their unresolved storms. For the avoidant, this is not just rejection, it's ego shattering. They've grown used to testing whether you'll still be there. used to the comfort of knowing your care was unconditional. When you withhold that, not in cruelty but in clarity, they confront the truth that their ego never wanted to face. Their independence was a performance, and your presence was its foundation. And here lies the paradox that cuts deepest. By stepping away, you're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. You're showing them the mirror they've avoided for so long. The ego that once thrived on the certainty of your emotional rescue is now left stranded in its own silence. That silence is not revenge, it's a reminder that you were never meant to be their permanent lifeline. And when they finally grasp that, their ego, so carefully built on the illusion of self-sufficiency, begins to crumble. Self-validation, finding worth within, one of the strongest weapons an avoidant X uses, is your constant need for their validation. As long as you're looking to them for approval, waiting for them to confirm that you are enough, they remain in control. Their ego feeds on this subtle dependency. But the moment you shift that search inward, when you no longer ask them to define your worth, but begin to recognize it for yourself, their foundation begins to shake. Think about it. When you're always waiting for them to notice you, to approve of you, or to acknowledge your effort, you've handed them power over your emotions. Every smile, every cold silence becomes a measurement of your value. But when you take that power back and declare quietly, deeply, that my worth is mine, not borrowed from you, you redraw the entire dynamic. This is not about arrogance, it is about alignment. The avoidant expects you to orbit their moods, but when you validate yourself, you break free from that orbit. They thought your self-esteem was chained to their words, but the moment you stop asking, the illusion of superiority collapses. They are left questioning, if you don't need my approval anymore, then what power do I have? The lesser-known philosopher Eldon Rickmar once wrote, "He who seeks praise from another signs away his own freedom." That line cuts straight to the heart of this reality. Living on borrowed validation is a quiet kind of slavery. The instant you find it within yourself, you become untouchable. In practice, this isn't about pretending you don't care, it's about creating a real shift. You pursue goals not to display them, but because they matter to you. You dress in ways that make you feel strong, not in ways that provoke their attention. You stop asking, "Do they see me?" and instead start asking, "Am I at peace with myself?" For the avoidant X, this is deeply unsettling. Their control only works when you are hungry for their gaze. When that hunger ends, their ego loses oxygen. What once gave them a sense of importance, your constant search for their acknowledgement, is gone. They are forced to face a reality they never wanted to admit. They weren't as central to your identity as they believed. Self-validation is not revenge, it is healing, it is freedom. And ironically, this freedom is the very thing that rattles the avoidant most. Because the greatest blow to their ego isn't your anger or your silence, it's your independence. When you no longer ask them to define your worth, you show them the truth. Their power was always borrowed, and now it's gone. Growth without display. For an avoidant X, the most painful moment isn't when you argue with them, criticize them, or try to prove a point. The deepest blow to their ego comes when they quietly realize that you are thriving without them, and that you never once tried to parade it in front of their eyes. Your personal growth, your glow-up, becomes undeniable, not because you shouted it, but because you lived it. Avoidants often operate on the belief that without their presence, you will remain stuck, confused, broken, or longing. Their ego thrives on the illusion that they were the anchor of your identity. But when reality shows otherwise, when you become stronger, more centered, and more at peace on your own, that illusion collapses. They may not admit it, but deep down, it shakes them. This kind of growth doesn't happen in loud gestures. It's found in the small, consistent choices you make every day, choosing to nurture your health, pursuing dreams that once felt buried, building relationships that feed your spirit, and above all, reconnecting with your own sense of self-worth. There's no need for cryptic quotes online, no need for carefully staged pictures designed to prove anything. The transformation is real because it's for you, not for them. A lesser-known philosopher, Karen Leonis, once wrote, "True evolution is not what is shown to others, but what brings stillness within." That truth sits at the heart of growth without display. When your progress is rooted in peace rather than performance, it becomes untouchable. The avoidance ego, which counted on you seeking their gaze, suddenly has nothing to feed on. In practice, this might mean you take up a new passion without ever announcing it. You change habits that once weighed you down. You begin to wake up with a quiet clarity that your life is moving forward, not in spite of them, but completely independent of them. That's the kind of growth they can't measure, because it isn't staged for their consumption. For the avoidant X, this realization is unsettling. Their story was always that you needed them, that you were incomplete without their approval. But now your life itself contradicts that narrative. The sight of you not chasing, not proving, but simply being more whole becomes the bruise they carry in silence. Growth without display is not revenge, it is freedom. It is the ultimate reminder that your worth and your progress are not defined by who notices them. And paradoxically, it is this quiet evolution that dismantles their ego more than any dramatic gesture ever could. Because while they may still be trying to control the story, you've already written a new one where you are the center, and they are simply a chapter you've outgrown. In the end, dismantling an avoidant X's ego isn't about revenge, punishment, or proving them wrong. It's about reclaiming yourself. Their power was never in their silence, their distance, or their coldness. It was in the belief that you needed them to feel whole. Once that illusion breaks, so does their control. Each of the 6 aspects in difference, refusing emotional rescue, self-validation, disengagement, and growth without display, points toward one simple truth. Freedom begins when you no longer orbit their world. Their ego, so carefully constructed, cannot survive in the absence of your reactions. What once looked like strength was only a performance, and when the audience leaves, the performance collapses. Philosophers throughout time have echoed this wisdom in different words. The strongest chains are often invisible, tied not to the body, but to the mind. By withdrawing your attention, your energy, and your need for validation, you dissolve those chains. You don't need to destroy their ego, because in reality, it destroys itself once you stop feeding it. Perhaps the most powerful lesson here is that the story has always been yours. They were a chapter, maybe even a storm, but never the author of your identity. Their ego was built on the assumption that you could not stand without them, but when you stand taller, quieter, and freer than ever, that assumption collapses under its own weight. So the end is not about them at all. It's about you, choosing peace over performance, freedom over fear, and growth over dependence. And when you live that truth, their ego fades into irrelevance, while your life expands into something far greater than they ever imagined.